First, I think one of the biggest question marks, one of the biggest concerns from 2024 and leading into this season was that offensive line. Of course, it was atrocious last season, but we can also kind of attribute that to a lot of injuries and a lot of young guys that didn't have a whole lot of experience that probably shouldn't have been thrown out there so early. Going into 2025, first, how does the cohesion and also the competitiveness look with that offensive line? Maybe even comparative to last season, because I think that's a good, maybe not, but I feel like that's a good comparing point. And then also, are there any shakeups that you think could surprise fans coming into fall?
Well, I don't know how much of a surprise this would qualify as, Josh, because I think there are plenty that have come to understand this dude was going to be undeniable at a certain point. But Eddie Pierre-Louis has been running ahead of Heath Ozida, getting first-team reps at left guard. Ozida made several starts there for Oklahoma a season ago. Pierre-Louis is a true freshman, only saw action in 4 games. But this is a guy that offhand, was he Oklahoma's highest rated offensive commit in the 2024 class? He may very well have been. He was the number 33 overall player in that cycle, according to Rivals, number 1 interior offensive lineman in the country, just an absolute freakazoid of an athlete. And so you figured at a certain point, Eddie Pierre-Louis' time was going to come. It was just a matter of, okay, at whose expense is it going to come by? And so I think with Pierre-Louis looking like the early favorite, to start at left guard, I'll be monitoring that closely over the next several weeks of camp. Can he hold on to that spot? Does Ozida have a counter punch, if you will, in that battle? And then the right tackle situation is the other kind of unresolved variable in the equation, because Derek Simmons, for most of the offseason, has been the projected starter at that position. He's been in concussion protocol this week. Jake Taylor, his primary backup, the redshirt junior out of Las Vegas, he's been sidelined as well. And so as of right now, the guy that's getting first-team reps at right tackle is Stanford transfer Luke Baklenko. And so it's him opposite Jacob Sexton. You'd like, obviously, and you'd expect that when the season begins, you have Sexton and Simmons as your bookends. Everything else feels reasonably clearly defined. I still think a battle is brewing at center between Troy Everett and Jake Michaela. Everett's gotten the majority of the first-team reps there, but the Sooners paid a pretty penny to bring in Michaela, and I don't believe they brought him in with the express purpose of making him a backup. That's not to say that they're going to force the issue and play him at center over Everett, even if Everett is better. But there are high expectations in that building for Jake Michaela and what he's going to bring to the table for Oklahoma immediately in 2025. So you look back to last year, there was never really an opportunity for that offensive line to establish any sense of cohesion because it was a constant revolving door at multiple positions. I think once Simmons clears concussion protocol and he's back there in the mix for Oklahoma, at that point, assuming no further injuries, you would very much expect that this offensive line really starts to gel as a unit. And that's already happening. And Ben Arbuckle and Brent Venables discussed that in their press conferences last week. But we should see, at minimum, an above average offensive line for Oklahoma this year, assuming they can keep, for the most part, the same 5 guys in the lineup week in, week out. It's very difficult to play. And it was John Mateer that just days ago mentioned, look, it's difficult to get 5 guys doing the exact same thing, and they have to play in concert in order to be effective. Offensive line play is a difficult thing to coach. It's a difficult thing to manage. It's a difficult thing to execute. And so you have to have continuity there to a certain extent. Otherwise, you're just kind of lost at sea. And so Oklahoma fans will no doubt be keeping their fingers crossed that this unit is able to stay healthy, because that is going to be the biggest sign that there are brighter days ahead for Bill Bedenbaugh's group.
Yeah. And I've mentioned this in the past too, when talking about how important, like you said, that cohesion, that kind of just understanding and the connection that you've got with the offensive line. I think that's the one group that it probably means the most to have that chemistry with one another, just because if you take one singular group, I think the wide receiver group might be the closest one. Obviously, if you go to the defensive side of the ball, then I suppose when you're covering pass coverage, then you also want to have that understanding. But for the most part, every other position group really just has to know what their job is, where the offensive line really has to know what the guy next to him is going to go on to next, and know what his responsibility is compared to what my responsibility is. And so, yeah, I think that's a really big piece. And I know you and Brandon have both reported some on this, but how do you feel with the aggression that you've seen from that offensive line, especially, like I said, comparing to last season? Not that it's really a good comparing point, I suppose, because you didn't see much of it at all last season. But does it feel like it's going in the right direction compared to what, of course, that banged up and not so good offensive line felt like last season?
Bill Bedenbaugh is certainly trying to instill a greater sense of aggression in them. And we've seen that on the practice field. Some of the drills they're running through, it's something he's really, really emphasizing is aggression. And understandably so. And I will say, the other thing that encourages me about where this offensive line can go in 2025 is there are some huge bodies in that offensive line room. I mean, guys, Jacob Sexton is a perfect example. Jacob Sexton's a guy that for the last couple of years has been playing right around 310, I do believe. He's 330 right now, and it looks great on him. It doesn't look like a fat 330. Every single scholarship offensive lineman on Oklahoma's roster is north of 300 pounds, with the exception of Jake Michaela, who's at 299, and they look lean. They look like they look muscled up. They look bulky, but they also look lean. There's not a lot of bad weight that any of them are carrying. We've seen Fabechi Wiwu reshape his body a little bit. I believe he was the heaviest player on Oklahoma's roster last year, and he's trimmed down to a svelte 325 or so. And so with the way that this offensive line looks in terms of what they are as physical specimens, in addition to Bedenbaugh trying to unlock and instill some of that additional aggression in their game, and just the prospect of significantly improved continuity as opposed to a year ago, I like the potential that this unit brings to the table in 2025. We'll have to see it on the field. The jury is still out until, I would say, probably the Auburn game, because Auburn does have some really solid talent up front. Michigan does as well. But after the first 4 games, I think we'll get a clearer idea of how good this unit actually is. But there's a lot of promise there, and I'm encouraged by what I've seen so far.
Yeah, that's definitely stuff that the Oklahoma fans love to hear, and especially when talking about that group, again, with probably the most concern around it, because, again, without the trenches, you really can't win football games, especially in the Southeastern Conference.